Hello, I'm Ryan Jones, and welcome to this part of the Housing Opportunity through Modernization Act of 2016 training on the PIH notice. In this part of the training, we will cover Attachment F, units not subject to program limitation referred to as the program cap or income mixing requirement referred to as a project cap. The attachment covers the units excluded from both the program limitation and the income mixing requirement if placed under a HAP contract on or after April 18, 2017. In this section, we'll discuss accepted units, unit size configuration, applicability of PBV project selection requirements, and other units not subject to the program limitation or income mixing requirements. Units that were previously subject to certain federal rent restrictions or receiving another type of long-term housing subsidy provided by HUD do not count toward the program limitation or the income mixing requirement. To be included for this exception, the units must have been placed under a HAP contract on or after April 18, 2017. On the left side of the slide, you will see the types of HUD assistance a unit may have had to qualify for this exception. A unit subject to a rent restriction as a result of one of the HUD loan or insurance programs is listed on the right side of the slide. These exceptions are listed in Attachment F of the notice. In addition to having received the HUD assistance or having been subject to a rent restriction, the unit must meet both the following conditions to qualify. First, the unit must be covered under a PBV HAP contract that first became effective on or after April 18, 2017, as I previously mentioned. And second, in the 5 years prior to the date, the PHA either issued the RFP under which the project was selected or selected the project based on a prior competition, or without competition, the unit met at least one form of assistance or was subject to one of the rent restrictions. If the existing or rehabilitated project was selected based on a prior competition or without competition, then the date of selection used to determine if the 5-year threshold has been met is the date of the PHA written notice of owner selection. Moving on to PBV New Construction. A newly constructed unit developed under the PBV program may also be excluded from the limitation, provided the unit qualifies as a replacement unit. The unit must meet 4 requirements to meet this exception to the limitation. The first being that the unit that the PBV newly constructed unit is replacing, that being the original unit, must have received one of the forms of HUD assistance or must have been subject to a rent restriction as a result of one of the HUD loan or insurance programs no more than 5 years from the date the PHA either 1. Issued the RFP under which the PBV new construction project was selected, or 2. Selected the PBV new construction project based on a prior competition or without competition. The second requirement, the newly constructed unit is located on the same site as the unit it is replacing. An expansion of or modification to the prior site's boundaries as a result of the design of the newly constructed project qualifies as the same site as long as a majority of the replacement is built back on the site of the original development, and any unit that are not built on the existing site share a common border with or cross a public right-of-way from or touch that site. The third requirement is that one of the primary purposes of the planned development of the PBV new construction project is or was to replace the affordable rental units that previously existed at the site, as evidenced by at least one of the following. Former residents of the original projects are provided with a selection preference that provides the residents with the right of first occupancy at the PBV new construction project, or prior to the demolition of the original project, the PBV new construction project was specifically identified as replacement housing, or that the original project was part of a documented plan for redevelopment of the site. The last requirement, that the HAP contract first became effective on or after April 18, 2017. Moving on to unit size configuration. The unit size configuration of a PBV new construction or rehabilitation project may differ from the unit size configuration of the original project that the PBV units are replacing. The total number of PBV units may also differ. However, under no circumstance may the program limitation exception be applied to units that exceed the total number of covered units in the original project. Let's look at the example on the slide. A PBV new construction project will consist of a total of 50 PBV units and is replacing a former Section 236 project consisting of 40 units. The maximum number of PBV units that would meet the program and project limitation exception would be 40 units. The remaining 10 PBV units would count against the program and project limitation. Let's now discuss the applicability of PBV project selection requirements. For owner proposals involving accepted units for existing, rehabilitated, and newly constructed properties, the standard requirements for selecting projects and the units for PBV systems listed on the slides remain in effect. Those are consistency with the PHA plan, goals of deconcentrating poverty and expanding housing and economic opportunities, site selection, and all civil rights requirements. The difference here is that any PBV assistance provided to these properties does not count against the 20% cap and may be used to project base up to 100% of the units in the project. HUD waived the statutory and regulatory provisions regarding the 20% program limitation for RAD PBV units. Under HOTMA, neither are these units subject to the income mixing requirement as long as they meet the condition in Section 1 of Attachment F of the notice. So what does this mean? It means that a PHA that is administering RAD PBV assistance does not take the voucher units attributable to the RAD PBV contracts into consideration when calculating the 20% limitation. Moving on to HUD VASH. HUD was awarded vouchers specifically designated for project-based assistance out of the HUD VASH appropriated funding in most fiscal years between 2010 and 2016. Because these units were made specifically available for PBV assistance, HUD determined that the PBV units supported by those vouchers do not count against a PHA's PBV program cap as long as the vouchers remained under PBV HAP contract at the designated project. Moving on to reporting requirements under this section. If a PHA wishes to add PBV units under the program cap exception described in this section, then the PHA must provide the number of PBV units to which it will be attaching PBV assistance under the exception authority to HUD no later than 14 calendar days prior to the date the PHA intends to issue the RFP or make the selection. The specific exception that covers the units must be indicated. The information is submitted to pbvsubmission@hud.gov. PHAs are not required to report future RAD projects for which it will be attaching PBV assistance or future HUD VASH awarded vouchers specifically designated for HUD for project-based assistance. Thank you for your attention to this section. We'll now move on to the next section.